Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Marilyn Grafsgard, and I'm with the Business Services team at the South Dakota Department of Labor and Regulation. And I'd like to welcome you to today's Workforce Knowledge Series event, Youth Labor Laws. Our speaker today is Brian Mundal. Brian has begun his wage and hour career in 2010 as an investigator in Sioux Falls, South Dakota field office under the Denver, Colorado District Office. During his time as an investigator, he has conducted enforcement actions of all acts enforced by the agency, served as a team lead across many of the agency's initiatives, and has been on an extended assignment as the assistant district director for the district office. Brian's work has been recognized with multiple Secretary of Labor Achievement Awards for worker protection and professional achievement, and has twice received the Southwest Regional Administrator Award for exceptional service. Brian also serves as an instructor for agency's new investigators and teaches advanced investigative techniques to senior investigators. Before joining Wage and Hour, Brian worked in local law enforcement, was a branch manager of a regional payroll company, and profoundly served on active duty with the U.S. Navy for more than 9 years. Brian earned his AAS in law enforcement science from Southwest Technical College and his BA in business management and MBA from the University of Sioux Falls. Brian is married to his wife Jessica and has two adult children, Ethan and Jacob, and a spoiled dog and two cats who can only imagine dreaming of being as cool as his dog. Brian enjoys traveling to warm places when it's cold outside and riding his motorcycle as many nice days as possible. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Brian to talk to you about youth labor laws.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for attending. This is probably one of my favorite things to do is to do presentations to try to educate everybody, trying to educate everybody on the regulations that we enforce. We are going to be looking specifically at the child labor regulations under the Fair Labor Standards Act. I think I just got an email today. The Fair Labor Standards Act, 88 years old. This is a law that regulates all of us. It's minimum wage, it's overtime, it's employer record keeping, and it's the child labor sections on it. These laws, they've been around for a long time. They don't really change very much. So the information that we're going to be putting out there has been around and in its generally similar format for a very long time. A lot of people know a little bit about some of these regulations, but we want to try to at least get you a little further, a little deeper with your knowledge, and at least provide you the opportunity to know where to find additional resources if it gets to that. So with that, the Department of Labor is dedicated to helping young workers find positive and early employment experience. But the work that we do or that we enforce, it has to be safe. The child labor provisions of the Fair Labor Standards Act were enacted to ensure that when young people work, that this work does not jeopardize their health or well-being. And where these child labor laws came out was the first female Secretary of Labor was Perkins was her last name. And there was a horrific fire that happened where, excuse me, where a bunch of kids were killed. It's called the Triangle Waist Shirt Factory fire. And it happened probably, I don't know, 90 years ago, 95 years ago. And so there was a lot of people who died because the employers actually chained the doors closed. And so these really young kids were killed because they couldn't escape. Excuse me, got a tickle. And so that's kind of where, when Frances Perkins became the Secretary of Labor, a lot of these regulations were brought into place. So that's kind of where these all started, about creating a safe work environment for our youth. So we have a disclaimer. The information I provide does not carry the force of legal opinion. We enforce the regulations, not what is printed within these slide decks. This is a brand new slide deck. You guys are seeing it for the first time. It literally just came out. I think I saw it 2 weeks ago. So I have not actually gone through and done everything. So we're going to kind of learn as we go. It is possible there might be something that is incorrect in here. If it's incorrect, I'll probably catch it. But if I don't, understand that we enforce what the regulation is, not what this slide deck may contain. So what we're going to talk about today, non-agricultural child labor under the Fair Labor Standards Act. So non-agriculture is exactly what the name suggests. It's work that would be performed by people under the age of 18, not on a farm. So these child labor protections are going to be very specific to ages. There are 14 and 15-year-olds can only work very specific hours. They can only work very specific jobs. And then we have what we call hazardous occupations for anybody under the age of 18. And then there'll be some additional resources. And what you'll see on here is you don't see anything under the age of 13, under the age of 14, because when you're under the age of 14, you cannot legally work in a non-agricultural job. So if you hear these stories about 12-year-olds or 10-year-olds or something working at a little restaurant, bussing tables, it's probably a violation. All right, so let's talk about some of these protections by age. So when you are under the age of 14, unless there's an exemption for you, like delivering newspapers or babysitting or something like that, you are not legally allowed to work under a business that is covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act. And the Fair Labor Standards Act covers, I think the last percentage I saw was like 96% of all businesses in the United States. 14 and 15-year-olds, you can work outside of school hours for a limited number of hours per day and per week. So that would be 3 hours on a school day, 18 hours on a week where school's in session. And then you can do anything that's not specifically prohibited. So how we look at this is the difference between 14 and 15, and I think I said that wrong, is when you're 14 and 15, there's a list of occupations you can do. And so if the occupation you're trying to do when you're 14 or 15 is not permitted, then it's prohibited. And then when you become 16, and we'll talk about that in a second, that kind of inverts. If it's not prohibited, it's permitted. So, but specifically 14 and 15, you can only do what's allowed. You can't do anything else. 16 and 17, there are no hour restrictions, and you can do any job that's not prohibited. And then once you're 18, you can do anything. There's no restrictions across any of the work that we do, or any other thing that we would enforce. Now, you may still have some other regulations that might be out there, like, you can't get a commercial driver's license, you can't drive a semi truck, you can't, there may be insurance companies who won't insure people until they reach certain age. That's fine. Those are separate regulations. They would not fall under our child labor regulations. So what can 14 and 15-year-olds actually do? So they can generally do virtually all retail jobs, cashier, stocking, office type work. They can do janitorial work, anything like that in a retail establishment. They can do some food service work. They like working as a server or a busser or a dishwasher. However, as a dishwasher, there are some limitations that can happen in there when it comes to like assembling or disassembling some of the tools that might be prohibited. But washing them when it's completely disassembled is fine. You can do anything creative. Those are all going to be allowed. You can do anything intellectual. Those are all going to be allowed. And then there are some very limited exemptions that come in for like a 15-year-old who can work as like a lifeguard. And then they can work at an amusement park or a recreational facility, or we'll see them at like golf courses and things like that. So whenever we're dealing with a 14 and 15-year-old, if you are an employer and you're looking to hire somebody in here, understand that if the work is not permitted, it is prohibited. And so some of the things that a 14 and 15-year-old can't do, like they can't do anything in manufacturing. Like if you've got some sort of production facility, they cannot work there. Other than if there was like an office portion of it that they could work in the office section, doing some things like that, but they couldn't be on the manufacturing floor. They can't do anything with baking or cooking. They can't do any like delivery type services. They can't do anything in construction. They can't even be on a construction site. They can't load or unload equipment from vehicles. They can't work in freezers. They can't do door-to-door sales. All of that stuff would be prohibited work for a 14 and 15. So when we, oh, oh, there it goes. So whenever we're looking at the 14 and 15-year-olds and specific to their hours, this is going to be different than what we're going to find under South Dakota state law. South Dakota state law is going to be allow for more hours in a day, but understand just like you have to enforce the law that's more protective of the worker, like with regards to the minimum wage. South Dakota has a higher minimum wage than federal. South Dakota law applies because it's more protective of the worker. Under federal law, because the child labor is more restrictive, more protective of the worker, you would have to follow federal law. So as an employer, uh, sometimes it can be kind of difficult to understand which law to follow. And from our position, it's the one that's more protective of the worker. Higher state minimum wage, follow that law. More restrictive hours federally, follow that law. So here's what we're looking at: 3 hours on a school day. And if they were in school on Friday, then that's a school day, even though they don't have school the next day. 18 hours on a week where school is in session, meaning any week that they went to school that week, 18 hours is the limit. If they don't have school on a particular day, they can work 8 hours on that day. But if there was still school that week, understand you're limited still to 18 hours. So you can work like 8 hours on a Saturday or a Sunday or both, but then you may not be able to work very many or anything during the week. In a week where there's no school, they can work up to 40 hours. They can never work overtime. And then we have time restrictions on here, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., except June 1st through Labor Day, when you can work 7 a.m. to 9 p.m., understanding that you're still limited to all of the hours above the 3 to 18, 40 hours a week. So you just got a larger window where you can work those limited hours. So the problem we have here in South Dakota is schools generally get out mid-May. So in mid-May, it's not June 1st. So they're still limited to 7 p.m., even though they're not in school. And then we go back to school second, third week in August, so they can still technically work till 9 p.m. because it is not yet Labor Day. So it's kind of a catch in the rule. I think this is a very old standard from, not that I'm going to date myself, but when I was younger, we went to school until Memorial Day and we didn't go back to school until after Labor Day. So it's just changed a little bit, but this rule, it still stands and this is still what would be enforced. And if we're dealing with somebody who may be a homeschooled child, we would look at the hours for the school district in which the child lives. So doesn't matter if, as a homeschooled kid, he's off at noon, he technically cannot work until school would get out at the school district in which he lives. And then he's still limited to the same hour restrictions. And it doesn't matter if his parents give permission. So again, so that was the 14 and 15-year-olds, and that's where we're going to have the most restrictions, is with them. When you're 16 and 17, you can work any hours. There are no hour restrictions. The only thing we're looking at is these hazardous orders. These hazardous orders apply to everybody under the age of 18. And I think I was just telling Marilyn when I got here, I'm working on one right now where unfortunately an employer had a couple of 16-year-olds driving a car, and those penalties start at $16,035 per kid, and there was three of them, and that sucks. But it's no one got hurt. Doesn't matter. They still did the work. They still drove the vehicle. It's a hazardous order, and it's one that we're going to talk about. So these are the 17 hazardous orders that the Secretary of Labor has said, if you are under the age of 18, you cannot do this. So you can't do anything with explosives, anything exposure to radioactive materials, mining, forestry. I mean, you can read the list here. And one of the ones I was just talking about, driving. You can't drive when you're under the age of 18. There are some limited exceptions when you're 17. But if you're going to hire someone who is 17 and you plan on having them drive, look at before you have them perform that work, reach out to me. We can definitely go through the nuances of what those very limited exceptions are. So these are the things that if you're under the age of 18, you cannot do. And like I said, the penalties start at $16,000 per worker for a violation of it. If they get injured, it's something like, because I'm dealing with that. Unfortunately, dealing with that, and it's terrible. Um, the penalties are like 72,000, and if we show that it's intentional, then that 72,000 can double to 140,000. So it goes up exponentially. If you have them do something they're not supposed to do, they're injured, and it doubles again if you knew it and you knew they shouldn't have been doing it. I got Lacey sticking her hand up.
Hey, Brian, just a quick question. When you talk about driving and kids,
Yeah.
does that include mowing?
So the
If you're
answer to that,
driving like a
yeah. So
lawnmower?
yeah. So the answer to that is no. Driving is limited to vehicles that are designed to be driven on the road. And so what we tell employers who are going to have somebody mowing, like a lot of cities or counties or golf courses, they'll have these kids on these big riding lawnmowers. They're totally fine as long as you don't drive them on the street. So you can't, be buzzing down, 3 or 4 blocks between the parks or something like that. If you just going to cross over it, you're fine, but you can't be commuting on it. So it can't be on the public roadways.
Is that the same thing with a forklift?
Yeah, same thing. Yeah.
So
Well,
if you're going,
actually, with a forklift, you can't operate a forklift under the age of 18 at
okay,
all.
that's
And
what I
there,
thought. Yeah.
and so we wouldn't be looking at that as a driving. There's a different hazardous order for that. It's hazardous order number 7, which we could be considered a hydraulic lifting device. So,
Okay.
and I'm sure that might be one we actually talk about here. So.
Okay. Thanks.
So, yep. Um, so explosives, radioactive materials. I haven't found one who did any of that here under the age of 18. But driving is one that I'm working on it today. Unfortunately, this is one that I find pretty frequently. And when I start telling some of the driving things, like some of the people, it's kind of incredible. You're like, why did the employer think that that was okay? Like the one I recently did where we had a 16-year-old and he was driving a tow truck doing roadside assistance on the interstate. So I don't know why the employer thought that was okay, but he was doing it. Um, so you can't drive the vehicle. You can't work as the outside helper on a vehicle. And think of like Christmas time, like UPS. UPS has always got that second person in there where the driver pump pulls up and that guy's in the back and he's running the package to your door and they're off down the street again. Or the garbage man back in the old days when they used to hang off the back of the truck. If you're under 16, you can't do that type of work. Or you can't do that if you're under the age of 18 at all. So mining and forestry out in the hills, I'm sure we'd have something like this out there. I haven't found anybody performing that type of work, but under 18, you cannot do it. Um, Lifting equipment, this is where we've gotten that forklift. So any power driven hoisting apparatus. So where we get issues on this one is not what you would think of here. It actually shows up in like the nursing homes. Picture working in a nursing home and you've got those lifts on the side of a bed to help an elderly person in or out of their bed into the chair, whatever it may be. That's actually where I get more violations on this than anything else with hydraulic or powerlifting equipment would be there. So, but I get them. I had a couple of 17-year-olds with a 40-foot boom doing roofing down in T here, I think last summer or the summer before. So they're out there. It happens. Um, so, Peggy, you have a question?
Yes, please. I noticed on the earlier slide, it mentioned non-ag.
Yes,
Are there different rules for ag?
there are. Agriculture is very different. So,
Will
I generally don't go into the agriculture rules. And the reason I don't is, um, they're very limited, and we don't generally run into that here very often because most kids on a farm are working for mom and dad. And so there's some exemptions on the farm that don't exist anywhere else. So I generally don't talk about them because I don't want to be confused. But if you have very specific ag questions and you want to talk about them later or one-on-one, I'm happy to do so.
I just have one question. So if it's not on the farm, but it's cleaning stalls, is that allowed? Cleaning manure out of stalls?
So this is where we get into, it's the size of the equipment and it's the age of the person. So 16 and older, they could do it. As long as it didn't exceed 20 horsepower.
Okay.
So,
They're basically using shovels and rakes,
oh,
so,
yeah, you could do that then.
okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
if
Thank you.
if you're using like a skid steer or something to do it, then 16 and older, there are no hazardous orders under agriculture.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yep. Okay. So other things we do, meat processing, they can't use like power-driven meat slicers, things like that. Um, they can't work in anything like on a kill floor. Unfortunately, we've seen that happen. Anything with the rendering or processing, things like that. If they're working on a production floor and they're under the age of 18, it is basically off limits for them. Um, and there are no exceptions for anything like this. Another one where we see power-driven machines, like wood machines, like in a manufacturing, or metal machines, shearing or bakery. All of these are going to be off limits. There are some limited student learner exemptions or apprenticeship program types of exemptions that are out there, but unless, if you have no idea what I'm talking about when I say student learner or apprenticeship, then it doesn't apply to you because you're going to know if you've gone through that process to get a student learner agreement or to go through an apprenticeship program. You're going to know that you've done that process, and then at that point you'll know what they can or can't do. But if what I'm saying is kind of going over your head there, and you're a business owner, you have not done it and they cannot do this work. So, and where we see a lot of some of the issues with some of the baking, and this is where I come back to the dishwasher. It's kind of this last bullet point here, the use, setup, cleaning of power-driven machines. Where we see this also would be like any of the prohibited machines for the cooking or baking process. Um, they're not, if they can't operate the machine, then they can't disassemble that machine to clean it, to wash it, to do any maintenance on it. They can't disassemble it, they can't reassemble it. Once it's broken down to its parts, if you're the dishwasher, yeah, you can wash it up and do whatever it is you need to do. But if you can't operate it, that means you cannot maintain it, assemble or disassemble it either. Okay, so compactors and balers. I have only had experience with this one time. And I'm not going to say the name of the grocery store chain, but this grocery store chain never hires anybody under the age of 18. Never, ever have they ever done it. However, we had a manager who brought their kid to work one day, and the kid was 12 years old and was letting them load the paper box baler and operate the paper box baler. And that was a very expensive lesson for that now former manager of that grocery store chain. They can't do it. These machines are prohibited for anybody under the age of 18 for the operation of it. You can load it and stuff like that. But there's got to be a key in there, and that key can't be in the machine. You can't unload it when the box is compressed and they make the big bale. You cannot unload that box, but you can take the empty boxes and chuck them in the machine. That's fine. You're just not allowed to actually recycle the machine. So, um, saws, again, we get back to like power equipment, power saws, construction sites is where we're going to see these things. Any type of saw that can be used with regards to construction or demolition. These are all going to be prohibited. And there are, again, some very limited exemptions for student learners and apprentices that are out there. But if you're not part of that or haven't done it, then these will be prohibited. And we see these, where we're usually going to see them. It's like, well, summer's coming. So it's going to be, kids going to earning some money and going with dad to the construction site. And, they're kind of kicking rocks around the site. And the next thing you know, they're cutting some boards. And next thing you know, they're up on the roof and putting sheeting down. And it's just a slippery slope. So if you're an employer and you have this type of equipment, you're looking at 16 and 17-year-olds, understand that there's a lot of stuff they're not going to be able to do and operate and touch. Demolition, roofing, excavation. All of these are generally going to be prohibited. Whenever you're doing anything in demolition, you cannot be there at all. Anything in wrecking, you can't be there. Roofing, they can't even be on the ground picking up the shingles that don't make it into the dumpster. They can't even be on the ground picking that stuff up. They Anything in manufacturing of brick tile and similar, we don't really have that around here, so don't have a lot of experience with it, but that's going to be prohibited. Trenching and excavation, they can do this work, but they can't use any power tools or equipment. So if you need, like Midco, I'm just throwing Midco out there because it's, a big company that we all know. But if they hired 16-year-olds and they were kind of laying, cables, these kids could go and take shovels and dig around where the box is and set the pedestals and do things like that. They just can't go more than 4 feet deep and they can't use power tools. So other than that, that would be trenching excavation as far as you could go. So again, apprentices and student learners, what these are, they're 17 HOs, and these very specific ones, 5, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 17, do allow for an exemption for apprentices and student learners. So that would be the power-driven woodworking, metal forming machines, meat processing machines, balers, compactors, power saws, roofing, and trenching. So those are the ones where that you could do these types of apprenticeship programs, either through a school or through the Bureau of Apprenticeship Training under the U.S. Department of Labor. So again, like I mentioned, these are where if you're interested in those types of programs, this is where you would go to get that. Usually with the student learner agreements, those are going to be through your school. If your school has like a CTE program, that's where you're going to find those types of agreements and apprenticeship training. I know the state has been doing a bunch of stuff. Marilyn, who's this contact out there? Is that still, I'm trying to blank on her name.
Her
Can't think
contact
of-
would be Tara Bartkowski is the director.
Tara. Yes,
Yep.
Tara, that's her name. So you could work with her through Tara at the state, and then she works with John Bolger, who is the director of the apprenticeship training through the U.S. Department of Labor here in South Dakota. So links to this information will be out there, and we will try to get this. I think I'm going to try to get this out to everybody. I'm going to need to scrub a few things out before I can share this. But I will get this over to Marilyn, and then she can share this with everybody who's on the call. And then these links will be active, and you can click those links for additional information regarding the child laborers or apprenticeship programs. When we talk about apprenticeships, There are certain jobs that are what we would call apprenticeable. I think that's the word that John used when him and I were talking. This is really what they're going to be. It has to be an actual trade that they consider apprenticeable. It has to be something that has been declared hazardous. That the work that they're doing is short, that it's incidental to the actual learning component of it. And then that program has to be approved by essentially the apprenticeship training with the Department of Labor. Student learners, again, it's usually going to be run through the school districts or sometimes a local, like the technical schools, like Southeast and Lake area and Mitchell and stuff like that. Sometimes they will have programs running through the local school districts because they are part of the school district. They're not, that's how they're operated. And so sometimes they'll be run through them. But either way, the school is where that will center. And if they have a program there and instructors and they're in if they're in a trade school or a learning environment, then that they will help develop those programs. So wage and hour, this is who we are. We do the enforcement for these child labor regulations. We do outreach and education where we try to provide as much information to employers as possible. Obviously, we don't expect you to learn all of this or memorize all this, but we at least want you to know, have that awareness that this might be a violation. I need to look into it. Where do I find the information or who do I call? So that's really what we'd like, we don't expect you to remember everything. I can't remember it all either. And I've been doing this quite a while. I still refer back to the regulations frequently because I don't want to misstate something. But we want you to know that there are resources out there if you think something might be an issue or there could be a problem. We've got some websites that we offer. All these are hyperlinks that are going to be available to you. Youth Rules is just a website that we created that's been around for quite a while for employers and even workers to go to and look up information. And we try to put the information off this website in easily to understand terms. We don't try to speak in like legal language or anything like that. We try to make it very understandable. If you want to read the legal language of it, that would be this last link here, the 29 CFR 570. This is where the actual regulations are. And there's also publicly available what we call our Field Operations Handbook. Chapter 33 would also refer to a lot of our child labor regulations. And what our FOH does is it takes the codified language in the CFR and it will interpret that to be more to better explain like some of the tools. Like when we say this operation or this job, these are the tools that we would see. And it will also tell you what may not fall in the scope of that. Like if we're talking about a power tool, we'll say if you're doing things like this, then that doesn't apply. Those would actually be allowed. So it's a really good resource outside of the actual regulation on how we actually apply what the regulation says and what and how we essentially enforce that. What that process looks, if I come knocking on your door, usually what this looks like is me having an initial conference with you. We talk about what I do, how we do it, what we're looking at. We'll interview some workers. We'll look at some records. And then through this process, I never like to play the gotcha game. If I have an issue, I'm going to tell you right away so we can try to fix it right away. And then we have a final conference. Essentially, we kind of cover everything that we looked at, discuss any violations that we may have. If there's back wages owed, we talk about those and getting those monies back to the workers to make them whole for what they should have been paid. Other than that, that's really what I have. I tried to go through this as quickly as possible. I will get this out to you so you can kind of go through those a little bit deeper. If you have very specific questions regarding people who are 14 through 17. And if you are employing them or planning on employing them and you want to talk about specific jobs, maybe outside of this public forum, give me a call. I think Marilyn is probably going to share my information with everybody, but give me a call. And I'm happy to walk through it with you. I'm right here in Sioux Falls. I travel all over North Dakota, South Dakota, quite frequently. And I would much rather answer questions for you in this type of environment than have me show up unannounced. I'm like, hi, I'm here. Guess what you did? So um, please reach out to me if you need it. And then this is the obligatory slide that Marilyn made me put in. And then one more with all of the DLR people on here. So I'll give it back to Marilyn for a minute, and then I'll open up to questions. Did you have anything, Marilyn, that you needed to input?
Nope, we'll just close it up here real fast. So thank you for attending today's Workforce Knowledge Series. On behalf of the business service team, we want to thank our speaker, Brian Mundall, for sharing such valuable information with us. A link to our survey has been posted in the chat. We would greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to complete it and share your feedback. Your input helps us improve our events and better serve your needs. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll be happy to forward them to today's presenter, Brian. Our next Workforce Knowledge Series event will be held on June 18th at 11:30 a.m. Central, 10:30 a.m. Mountain, which is a change as it's the third Tuesday. Scott Day with DOC will be presenting on Reentry Works, Unlock Talent, Strengthen Your Workforce. We hope you can join us. Again, on behalf of the business service team with the South Dakota Department of Labor and Regulation, thank you for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next month. Have a great day.
All right, since we do have a couple of minutes left, I'm happy to answer any questions that might be out there if other people have some.
Brian, I have one actually. It came
Yeah.
out last year. It was a ATV dealer that wanted a younger kid to wash ATVs,
Yep.
which is probably not the problem. The problem was they actually had to ride it across the highway over to the car wash.
So again, we're down to ATVs. I mean, in South Dakota, we license them to drive on the road. And so we would consider it a vehicle. And depending on his age, if he's 17, probably going to be okay because he might meet a bunch of those very unique situations that are out there. 16 and under, I would probably have to say, I might have to think about that one. I may have to bounce that one off a colleague. If he's just driving across the road, it's probably fine, as long as he's not driving down the road.
On the road.
Yeah, on the road. If he's just got to across it and the car wash is literally right there, probably be okay because he's not on a public road driving that. Other than his crossing, but crossing is allowed. So I'd probably say it's probably okay, but I'd double check everything first before I commit to it. So, any other questions? Is there anything in the chat? Nope. So nothing in the chat. If we don't have any other questions, then what I'll do is, Marilyn, I will get this slide deck cleaned up and I will get this over to you. Unfortunately, the version I share with you, I'm going to take your slides out. So,
Okay.
but you can, put your stuff in the email, but yeah, I got to go clean up a few things on this and I will get this out to you and you can share it. All right. Well, thank you everybody for attending.